this is Shannon Emmons with the Garland County Library with our newest edition of Author Talk. And tonight our guest is Crescent Dragonwagon. She is a many times published author in 6 different genres, including novels, poetry, cookbooks, culinary memoirs, biography, goodness. Oh, and of course, dozens of children's books. I am very, very honored to have her here with us tonight. Let me just welcome her. Can you hear us all right?
Hey, Shannon.
Hello.
Hello, readers and listeners out there and watchers, and happy to be with Shannon, who I see, and all of you who I don't see, but I know you're there.
Thank you so much for joining us tonight.
My pleasure.
We have a little background noise. We're hosting early voting at the library tonight, and the polls are just closing. So.
Our library here in Fayetteville is also having early voting, and boy, do I think voting is important, and I think libraries are important. So I'm actually going to early vote partially so I can do it in my library.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. We're just honored to be able to host that this year. Well, I am so excited to have you here tonight, and it's a very timely visit because you have very recently released one of your children's books that I absolutely love. And if it's okay, I'll just go ahead and introduce that now. It's called Will It Be Okay? And this new edition has illustrations by Jessica Love, which I thought were just absolutely beautiful. So if you'll tell us, please, sort of the story of this book. How did it come to you? What lives has it lived? And how did this new edition come to be?
Okay. Well, in the summer of 1976, and we should say that this book is a reissue. So it was actually written in that summer of 1976 when I was about 22 years old. I'm 70 now. In its original version of it. And I had just learned how to drive that spring. I learned to drive later than a lot of folks around here because I wasn't from around here, although I moved to Arkansas when I was 18. Anyway, I was at a conference, and it was sort of an international philosophical conference, let's say. And it was in Austin, Texas, and some friends of mine were going, and I went there. And all the programs were question and answers. Students, people attending would ask questions, and those that were responding, the teachers from around the world, would answer directly and very beautifully. So I think that was the first thing that sort of put that back and forth, the way where learning is not something that's imposed on you, but it comes out of your questioning, your needs. And the responses that teacher gave were so powerful because they were right laser focused to the person asking, as opposed to being lectured. So then I went from there. That same interesting summer, I had a scholarship to take a workshop with a man named Ira Prokof, who developed a writing technique called dialoguing. Okay. That was a writing technique for insight, not for dialogue the way you would use it in, say, a novel. And again, there was a lot of emphasis on that amazing thing, what Martin Buber called the I and thou. Okay. And here you are asking me questions and I'm answering. But that rhythm of a sincerely asked question and a sincerely given answer, and how calming it is, that was very much the flavor of that whole summer. And so just after the dialoguing class, when I was headed back home, this book came to me. And, if you show up for writing on a daily basis, every so often, the muse or your higher power or God or whatever you want, whatever name you want to give to that thing that is larger than you, but which sometimes you get to be kind of a conduit for, yes, pipe through which it flows. Somehow this book came to me, and it was published the first time in 1977 by Harper and Row. It was before they were HarperCollins. And Ben Schechter did the original illustrations. They were very tender, small scaled, soft. The child then pictured was a little younger than the way Jessica Love pictured. And they were wonderful pictures, but they had grown a little dated in time. And I also felt at the time they kind of skated the border of sentimental, because this little girl has strong feelings, and when she's mad, she's really mad.
Yeah.
And when she's hurt, when her feelings are hurt, when she's scared. And the little girl, in as Ben saw her, and of course I didn't say whether it was a girl or a boy. The illustrator in both cases nor did I say it was a mother, but in both cases the illustrators chose to visually say mother and daughter. And so the pictures were kind of dated. So that was sort of part one of Will It Be Okay?
Yes.
Part two, we go to the lockdown and the pandemic. And of course, like everybody, Mark, my darling husband, and I were, what can we do? What can we do? What's happening? It felt like the cruelest possible game of musical chairs. If you were employed and you worked from home already, great, you get a chair. If you don't have kids, or if you happen to be an educator and you do have kids, great, you get a chair. But if you have a job that you have to go out, you have a bunch of kids, suddenly you're locked into one place. Where's the income? Where's the, terrifying. And so when we were thinking, what can we do? He and I, we're both older. We had chairs. We had a house. We weren't in danger of losing the house. We both were self-employed, so we could work from home. I have cooking skills. A lot of people that were locked down they didn't know how to cook.
Indeed.
And suddenly they, so I had a lot of, between us, he and I had a lot of, but we still felt, is there not anything we can do? And I thought, well, with lockdown, if there's any family stress, the little hairline fractures that maybe aren't too serious because everybody can go away and then come back and go, those fractures could become really big.
Yes.
Maybe the little tiny thing that I can do is read a story out loud on Facebook every night. And there are my stories, and I know we're going to talk later. My mother was a very prolific children's book writer and editor. And Mark's daughter, Lisa Graff, is also a children's book writer. Yeah, you didn't know that.
Yes, I know.
There's a lot of them popping up in the family tree, extended family tree. And Lisa at that time had done one picture book. So we would do these Facebook Lives every night, and we started with 8 or 10 people. And then pretty soon they were dozens, and then there were a couple of hundred every night. And because Facebook Live is visually flips right and left, I found that although I could read out loud very easily in front of a class, it was tricky to do it on Facebook Live. So Mark, who was incredibly overqualified for this, held the pictures up. And on a lot of them, we would have a little conversation about the book afterwards. And it also meant that he got to get familiar with my mom's books. And it turned out to be 108 family-written children's books. And we read one a night for 108 nights. But the very first book that I read was that old edition of Will It Be Okay? Because I felt it was the most reassuring book that I wrote. And I felt everyone is asking, is it going to be all right? Will it be okay? At that moment, and nobody knew. Nobody knew what was happening. It was a very scary, anxious time. So after I read it that first time, besides the fact that I struggled with holding up the pictures and I enlisted Mark into doing it with me, after that first night, the other thing that I thought was, this book should have another life. This is the time for this book. It's such a divided, polarized time. We need something and so I typed it over. I made a very few changes. Children's books are a little shorter, and picture books are a little shorter than they were then, just a little bit. So a tiny bit had to be cut, and a tiny bit I felt might not be as acceptable in these less innocent times. So I, edited it, but kept it very much in the keeping of what it was.
Yes.
And I was fortunate in that Cameron for Kids and the wonderful editor, Amy Noveski, fell in love with the book. And their art director found marvelous Jessica Love, who did these great pictures. And the little girl is so feisty in that. When she's upset, that she's upset.
Her face, the colors, the shape that she makes.
Yeah, she's very expressive little girl. She doesn't feel things small. She feels them big. But when you're little, most kids tend to feel things big,
Yes.
largely, because they haven't been through it a million times. So those feelings are new and raw and challenging. And as I sometimes say, unadulterated. You have other losses or betrayals or fears to compare them with when you're 20, 30, 40, 50. By the time you're 70 or 80, you've seen so many scary things come and go, not too much gets to you, if you're lucky. And you've done your work. When the time you're old, you calm down. But when you're young, it's very intense. Food tastes more. You have more taste buds. Everything is more intense. And often you are asked to be quiet, or people don't answer your question. So I suppose I brought some of my own childhood into the little girl character. But that's how the book came to be written in its first and second. And I love Jessica's pictures, and Amy was a darling editor to work with. So that was a very happy thing for me.
Well, and I love that you said people tell you to be silent, because I feel like the heart of this book is the honesty between them, the little girl's honesty about her feelings and the real questions that she has, and then the caregiver's really honest responses. It's not sugar-coated, but it is reassuring.
Thank you. You see, we're going through a time where a lot of people, in the interests of protecting children, want to keep difficult things from them, the things that they interpret as difficult or possibly traumatizing. But let's remember that in the great fairy tales of forever, bad things happen and children are resourceful.
Yes.
We don't try to blank out that bad things happen. So, witches live in forests and gingerbread houses. Birds eat the crumbs that were going to take you home.
Yes.
Mermaids split their tails so that they can walk on land and be, pain and suffering, all of those. The reason that they are part of classic children's books is not to terrify the children, because children already carry a lot of fear in them. So to me, it is kinder to look at things honestly and give an idea, at least, of how you might contend with it, how you get to grow those skills. So don't pretend that slavery didn't exist or that the Holocaust didn't happen. Rather, let us look at it and think, okay, what was this about? How did this happen? Why did this happen? And what can we do? What's the fair thing to do? Should it have been that way? I was thinking about the Laura Ingalls Wilder books the other day.
Yes.
And this is a funny thing. To me, it's funny. So I had a kind of not very nice smelling to me hand soap that somebody gave me as it's squished down one that somebody gave as part of a gift basket thing. And I hate wasting, so I didn't want to throw it out. So I used it, and I was down to the very last little bit of it. And I was thinking, God, I'll be glad to get rid of that. I really haven't enjoyed. And then I thought, well, why couldn't you just throw it out? Well, I hate wasting. Where did you get that from? I got it from Laura Ingalls Wilder, because I read Laura Ingalls Wilder and the satisfaction of having the attic stocked with their food for the winter, and the way that they never wasted anything.
Yes.
And when the frost was coming, they made a green apple pie that tasted like a green tomato pie that tasted like apple pie. Mm-hmm. And I thought, if I was teaching Laura Ingalls Wilder, I would find something to teach side by side that looked at the Native American perspective, the indigenous people's perspective, as well as how the settlers saw it, the pioneers, the the Go West people,
Yes.
the settlers, that we showed and explored both sides. And I would probably be kicked out for teaching both sides at this point. But I
Yeah.
just think that that's the way that we strengthen our children, is by saying, yeah, hard things happen. And here are some of the ways to think about it.
Absolutely. Well, and it's funny that you mentioned Laura Ingalls Wilder's book specifically because Grace Lynn, of course, did a beautiful video about them and about, dealing with some of the harder passages and being honest with children. These passages are difficult, but they're part of the story.
Yes.
Um,
Yep. Grace Lynn and I share the experience of having been widowed, and those, really rough things happen in life. They
yeah.
just do. And when you're little, you say, or at least me, and pretty much every kid I know says, it's not fair. And there's something inherent in human beings, I believe, unless it gets really stamped out, where when we see things that aren't fair, it bothers us.
Yes.
And, a million times I said, it's not fair. And my mother said, honey, life isn't fair. And that was a very unsatisfying answer, although it's true.
Well, I wonder, sort of in the wake of those feelings, if you would be willing to read your lovely new book to us.
Would you like the whole thing or part of it?
I would take the whole thing, and I think my
Okay.
viewers here, our viewers, would be very
Okay.
happy as well.
Do you want to hold the pictures up while I read it?
Oh, let's see if we can do that logistically. I'm not sure that I'm better at that than the beginning of the pandemic.
Yeah, but the two of us together, it'll be better than me trying to do it
We'll
and
see.
flipping it around.
When you see that, are the words backwards?
No, the words are shaped beautifully.
Excellent. All right.
So here is Will It Be Okay? It's by me, Crescent Dragonwagon, with art by Jessica Love, being exhibited by Shannon Ammon. And this book at the beginning has a dedication on, I'm pointing at your book, and the dedication is for Sweetie Berry, friend and collaborator, who does so much to make it okay for so many. And Jessica Love, the illustrator, wrote, to my sister, Elena. And dedications, of course, it's the way that the author or the illustrator sort of sends a Valentine to someone that they love and thanks them for it. So here is the story. Will it be okay? Yes, it will. But what if there is thunder and lightning? You sit at your window and watch the rain beating down over the houses and streets in the dark night. You see how special it is because the lightning shows the rainy sky and countryside and all the city. You pay attention because the loud thunder is calling you, saying, look, look, the world is receiving a deep, long drink. But what if there is snow? Lots and lots of snow. Well, you put on your red leggings and your orange boots and your pink coat and your plaid scarf and your yellow hat and your fake fur earmuffs and 2 pairs of striped mittens, one on top of the other. But what if we plant a garden and nothing, not even the cabbages, comes up? We go to the nursery and buy 7 tomato plants just in case. When we come home, we dig 7 holes in the garden and put a tomato plant and compost in each one. We pat the earth back around each tomato plant and pour a bucket of water around each one too, to make them feel at home. Then we go inside to read a book. When we come out again, there is a tiny row of cabbage seedlings, and also the bush beans have come up. But what if a bee stings me? You run to the kitchen, and I rub a piece of raw onion back and forth on the sting. You say, "A piece of onion? That's silly. That won't work." But it does. But what if I am mad at everyone? You run away. You pack raisins, walnuts, oranges, crackers, and a flashlight in a red bandana. You knot its four corners together and tie it to a stick and carry it over your shoulder. You walk and walk till you come to the park. You stay all afternoon, sitting by yourself under a tree and then on a bench. Then you swing, pushing yourself off so hard, you go up so high, you make a song to yourself about being a bird. When you come home again, you are not mad at everyone. But what if someone doesn't like me? You feel lonely and sad. You walk and walk until you come to a small pond. You kneel in the grass by the edge of this pond, and you see something move. You put out your hand, and a tiny frog, no bigger than your thumbnail, hops into it. Very carefully, you lift your hand up to your ear, and the frog whispers, "Other people like you. Other people love you. Maybe that person will like you again, maybe not. In any case, you're likable and lovable, and it is all right." Because a frog tells you this, you believe it. But what if I forget my lines in the school play? You make up new ones then and there, and later everyone will say, "What a wise and sensible child. She forgot her lines, so she made up new ones." But what if nobody likes the way I dance? You go dancing in the woods, alone in the crackling leaves. One day you meet someone else dancing in the leaves. You dance together. You throw leaves on each other. You gather leaves into a big pile and jump into them. Then you go home and draw pictures and drink cocoa with whipped cream. But what if you die? My loving doesn't die. It stays with you, as warm as two pairs of mittens, one pair on top of the other. When you remember you and me, you say, "What can I do with so much love? I will have to give some away." So you love thunder and lightning, snow, planting cabbages, and bees. You dance with other people in the leaves and are in plays with them and run away with them and read books with them and get mad at them and make up with them. You love them and they love you, and you eat raisins together. So it will be okay? Yes, my love, it will. It will be okay.
Oh, it's beautiful.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for sharing that with us. I thought I couldn't love the book more, but hearing it in your voice is even better.
Thank you. Thank you. I mentioned before that idea of being something that the story flows through.
Yes.
When I wrote that, I was 22, and I had never, no one that I was really close to had died.
Yes.
I think I was, as I said, I think I was much more the little girl there. Now I'm much more the mother, but I don't know how I knew that. It was like, it was, and I didn't know it really. That book was in advance of where I was. And it's only now with its second return, I'm going, that's interesting. And it's a very interesting, humbling privilege for a writer to follow that story of, you know,
Yes.
I've heard it said that no one reads the same book twice because you're different each time that you read it. And so, I've reached that point where I'm deciding, okay, which of my favorite beloved books do I want to read over again one more time? But which are the new experiences I want to have? Do I want to revisit, or do I want to? So just time changes how you feel and understand a particular book that you love. And so this one it's very interesting to me to come back to it and see it. And you asked several questions about the life of the book. Of course, over the years, I got, in the old days, letters on paper that people would send to the publisher, who maybe would forward it to me, maybe not. And so I did hear several stories of how, in fairly tragic circumstances, little kids wanted to hear that book over and over and over again as a way to be reassured. Because, sadly, anything can happen to anyone at any time. It's an uncomfortable truth. We wish it wasn't that way. We feel in our hearts that it shouldn't be that way.
Yes.
Bad things should not happen to good people. There should not be car accidents. There should not be pandemics. And yet there are. And so the question of how we deal with uncertainty and fear becomes a pretty major life skill that probably not too many of us know, other than by just life kicking you around a little bit, and you either learn resilience or you shut down a bit. So
I've noticed that this same message runs through some of what you offer other writers through your workshops and your residencies. So you have your beautiful writers colony in Eureka Springs and your fearless writing workshops. Will you tell us a little bit about those resources and what you are looking to give to writers who work with you?
I would be glad to. Now, first, on the Writers Colony, it is true that I am the co-founder of it, but it's not mine. When you said your writers, I want to say, like the library, it's a 501c3. It's a nonprofit organization. It belongs to you as much as me. It belongs to anybody that needs a quiet place where the need for quiet is respected, and they can be isolated and work and be away from, for most writers, if you work at home, writing is a little difficult at times, mostly because people feel like they might not be doing it right. They're not sure. And indeed, often you're not doing it right at first, but you have to write all the stuff that's wrong to find out what you really want to say, and then you cut it out. But so, because you're sitting there with the anxiety of, oh, did I get this said right or not? Suddenly it's very urgent to do the laundry.
Yes.
Or, clean the cat box, or, so when you go somewhere on retreat to write, it is really productive. And I had found that to be a very productive part of my own writing life. And Ned, my late husband, and I didn't have any children. And we had run an inn for many years, and we knew we could sell the inn, which probably would have been smarter financially. But we kind of didn't, it was a magic thing, and we knew we would probably not be happy with, we'd heard enough stories of innkeepers who sold their inns and weren't happy with. So we decided to form this nonprofit organization and turn it into a writers' colony. And though I have not been hands-on involved since 2000, it's 22 years old. It's still serving writers not only from all over the country, but all over the world. I understood at one point that writers from 36 different countries had been there.
Oh,
And,
wow.
I read, they're very good about posting people's comments on staying there. And it really is serving writers. And, at the time I wanted to give Eureka Springs to the world and give the world to Eureka. And wow, that actually is a dream that did come true. And how many people get the, and I will say, humbling privilege of seeing something that they imagined that, and of course there were people who said, pipe dream, never happened. It happened. 22 years later, it is still there, and writers are still being nourished by their experience there. So that's that answer of the question. And as to writers, I do teach a workshop. It's a course really called Fearless Writing. I teach it online now. I've been teaching it for about 20 years. It's developed over time. And it has 12 sessions.
Okay.
As I'm teaching it online. I used to do it in person as a long weekend intensive or untensive, as I used to say, because it's not particularly tense. The tense part is beforehand when you are dealing with your fears and you think, oh, everyone will be better than me. All the kinds of fears, the grown-up equivalent of the kinds of fears that everybody that has that the little girl has, and will it be okay? Once it starts, that tends to vanish. But there are 12 sessions, and in it we look. That's very much about the process of writing, rather than the craft of writing.
Okay.
When people learn craft without understanding that the process contains a lot of fear and self-confrontation and doubt, and that does not mean that they're a lousy writer or that they're not, quote, meant to do that. It just means that's part of the process, and they were never told that it was. And so we sort of work through some of the aspects of those fears and how you can't make, I always tell people, I lied to get them there. They thought fearless meant they would leave without any fear, but actually they're going to leave fearing less.
Very nice.
Because they get that it's part of it. And it's sort of like, oh, okay, I recognize you. Sit down. I know you're along for the ride, but I'm driving. You can stay in the passenger seat. Don't say that stuff to me. I'll get back to you when I'm ready. Thank you for your input, but I'm driving. And so it is very delightful to see people. Most people that come to a writing class have a story that they are burning to tell, and they have invested a lot of, oh, if only I could, into that, and thus heaped up their own anxiety. It's as if you decided to run a marathon before you had toddled. Well, of course, when you're a toddler, you don't even know what a marathon is. You're just getting vertical because you want to be vertical and self-propelling. You don't know that there's track and running and awards, and there's just something. And so I try to get people back to that initial thing that makes a baby that's crawling want to stand up. And I do believe that to listen to or tell stories is as inherent as wanting to be self-propelled and vertical. And so one of my great joys in that, and the great joy, I think, for many students, is discovering that there are also stories that want to be told,
Yes.
that are maybe not the ones that they thought they must tell, or they're in addition to, and the delight they have in discovering the material that they already have, that they don't need much research for or much angst or labor, that it's right there, that they just didn't know that it was. And so it is a great pleasure to me to watch that and to hear the stories as they unfold. People always have the option of not reading aloud if they want, but they often do. It's not a critique group, although I do run critique groups. In a way, it's sort of my least favorite thing to do. I get a thrill from people enjoying. Oh,
The library has gone dark. Excuse me, but please continue.
There, it's back.
It's gone to sleep, and now it's woken up.
It was a Halloween thing.
It was very flashlight. So yes.
So that's a little bit about. I'm not drinking wine here. I'm drinking a little water in a bottle. So that's something about fearless writing. And I also have another one I teach that's Tuesdays with Crescent. And while fearless is about the writing process, TWC is sort of the overture to craft.
Okay.
It's discovering what happens when you stop driving with the emergency brake on. And as anybody that has ever driven with the emergency brake knows, your process is very slow and jerky. And so I give people usually I don't really like the word prompt. I will teach them a writing form and then give them a topic. And it's usually weird enough that it activates the part of the brain that, for example, puts a jigsaw puzzle together.
Yes.
It's like, how can I get these pieces to fit? And where are the straight lines for the corners? Rather than, I must write something significant that does honor to my aunt who gave up her life, whatever thing it is that you think is your big story. And you discover the small stories through making I tell the story of when I was young. I used to work in Arkansas Artists in the Schools, and I did a summer program for the boys training school and also the girls training school, the juvenile delinquent reform centers. Mm-hmm. And I did that. They each had 6 weeks of time. And one day I had some idea about what we were going to write about in the boys training school, but they had just switched work jobs this particular day. And whatever they used to be doing, now they were digging potatoes, sorting potatoes. And they came in there and they were, those children and young people, they were potato crazed. And I saw that whatever we were going to write about was one of them brought me a potato, right? You can't give the teacher an apple in training schools. The little boy brought me a potato. And finally, they were potato crazed. And finally, I looked at them and I said, okay, the topic of today's poem, shouting over the noise, will be how to tell a poem from a potato. Dead silence. And actually, one of the kids had a line in one of his poems that when we did a book of their work, I chose this for the title. And he said, a poem is not able to see in the dark.
Oh.
Now, really, think about that in relation to potatoes. What do we call the little sprouts on potatoes? We say they're eyes. Where does the potato grow? In the dark, under the ground. That was so amazingly brilliant of that child.
Yes.
A poem is not able to see in the dark, implying that a potato is. It was just, I thought, magnificent. So I really try to give people stuff that is weird enough that it, like those chattering children about the potatoes, that it stills the voice of, I have to write well. And they're going, well, how do I use these words in a 3-paragraph story, that's about a barn in Davenport, Iowa in 1937, or whatever weird thing that I gave them.
Yes.
It expresses the emotion of confusion without using the word. I give them enough things that they get very focused on, well, how do I work this in? And then at the end, they are surprised that, number one, they could do it. Number two, they're actually kind of fun. And number three, at what they wrote. It's amazing to see. And so in Tuesdays with Crescent, we just go into writing, and it is peripherally about craft, because afterwards, those who wish to read aloud, at first no one thinks they want to, and then everybody does because it's really fun. And we look at, what stays with you in that story that you just heard. And then I sort of will improvisationally teach off of what they tell me, um, what their stories are. We have some rudimentary lessons on craft. And then I do a number of, one-shot craft workshops, maybe on writing dialogue, or everyone says, show, don't tell. What does that really mean? Or how you take events from your life in memoir versus autobiographically based fiction. So I do these one-shot crafts things. But my favorite is really the process of writing
Yes.
to teach.
Well, let me ask you then, since I am, privileged to be here on the live stream with you and I have you, I essentially am asking you, will it be okay? But do you find that with practice, that critical voice becomes something that you can sort of wrestle down more easily over time with practice?
Well, you mentioned one of my favorite things, which is practice. And we will get back to practice in just a second. But to go to the will it be okay fact, I encourage people to look at the helpful inner editor versus the unhelpful inner editor.
Okay.
And there's a very easy way to tell the difference, which is the helpful editor. Let's say you've written something and you're alone in your room and you're reading it out loud, which, by the way, anytime you write something, you should always read it out loud, even if you're the only person in the room,
Yes.
because writing is heard by the ear as well as seen by the eye. And you'll learn a lot. You learn a lot by reading it to other people as well. So when you do that, the helpful inner editor will say, on that third paragraph, you went off on a tangent a little bit, and it's kind of interesting, but I wonder if it could go somewhere later, because you had us right in that narrative and you digressed from it a little bit. That's a helpful inner editor. An unhelpful inner editor is saying, you suck. This will never be any good. What made you think you were a writer? Blah, blah, blah. And, I encourage people a little bit to look at who were the voices of helpful and unhelpful editors, people in authority, when they were growing up. Because when you are young, you're tender clay. And you are so tender. I'm doing this because I'm picturing a thumb pressing into the clay and leaving a little groove there, a little indentation there.
Yes.
And often, sometimes a parent can be both a helpful and an unhelpful editor.
Yes.
Sometimes people are both. Sometimes they're clearly one or the other. The teacher that made me stay after school because she thought there was too much emptiness in a landscape that I had drawn and that I should fill it in. That's not good. That's not helpful editing, And so, you take it apart and you somewhat disempower it, and you stand outside of it and you look at that person, because some editing, again, to take the analogy of you can't drive with the emergency brake on, I will often ask, so what's more important to driving, the accelerator or the brake? And of course, if you give it any thought at all, very dangerous to drive without brakes. But if you don't have the accelerator, then your car is essentially a planter. It's not a vehicle. So I very much like to get that across, because there are some, everyone does need editing.
Yes.
I spoke before of Amy, my excellent editor on Will It Be Okay, and on another book that we are working on that is by my late mother, a book called A Rose, a Bridge, and a Wild Black Horse. It's another story. But once you understand that they're both necessary, you can kind of, to some extent, banish the unhelpful inner editor. If not banish it, you recognize it and you say, thank you, but be quiet. And you say, if you want to tell me something useful, tell me, but I'm not interested in this other stuff. You know, you're just Sister Mary Ignatius from third grade talking to me, or whoever, whatever horrible person, not to diss Sister Mary Ignatius, but whoever it is, a bully in school, there's always going to be someone outside who's going to be a critical voice, and we internalize them. So I encourage people to, in effect, witness those voices and think about where they came from, and then decide if they want them to sit outside or if they're invited into the room. And so it doesn't, fearless writing does not end fear. Will it be okay? Will not end fear, but it gives ways, it presents it not as a monolithic rock face that there's no way to climb up. It gives you, what do they call it? Pythons that people climb. I have never climbed rocks, so this may be a terrible analogy for me to try to make. But, there are ways up that cliff, and there are handholds and footholds, and other people have done it, and there are the ropes and the stuff like that. So sort of that's what I do. No one can take away fear. There's things that are legitimately scary out there. And then there's fun scary, like Halloween, or, why do people like, I'm not a horror movie person, but there are movies that have a scary thing in them that, there's something in us that is attracted to fear and overcoming it. And so I try in a way to channel those things for the people that I'm fortunate enough to have with me, that, and it takes a certain amount of fearlessness to sign up for something like that.
Yes.
But some people they carry a lot of that stuff, and, I'm all there, all in for them. I really want them to get it. And many of them have, not everybody has a desire to publish a book, but Monica Clark Robinson, who's Let the Children March, is probably part of she's a student of mine. Oh. And she took fearless writing twice. And she credits it with her becoming a professional writer. She always had the talent and the stories and the ideas, but she had to learn how to, about the process, and to say, shut up to those voices that were saying, oh, you could never. She's doing it. And I have another one that's writing op-eds for the Washington Post. By coincidence, when I moved to Fayetteville, across the street from me is another Arkansas writer, Talia Warner, who she's a fearless graduate. She took it twice.
She is our author talk guest for next month. So
good. I love her, and she is my neighbor, and she's another fearless graduate.
How wonderful!
So and there are many, many others, and and a lot of people take it for various reasons. Some want to write a family, just something for the family. Not everybody wants to be published, but for those who want, pretty much, if they do it and stick with it, yeah, they will.
It's so interesting to see the supportiveness of, I know certainly the Kid Lit community. When I started taking writing classes back in the 90s, we would all start in, Creative Writing 101, afraid that somebody was going to steal our story idea, afraid that it would be very cutthroat. And that wasn't the case at all. Everyone just wanted to lift each other up.
Yes. I feel like culinary writing is a really generous, it is true that, novelists maybe are a little more competitive with each other. But children's book and culinary, very generous. And I think part of it is because inherent in children's literature, you don't do it in isolation. You do it with and for children. You read it out loud. It is relational. Cooking and writing about cooking, it is relational. You're dependent on all those people that are growing the food and cooking the food and smelting the iron skillets. That the cornbread is. I actually toured in Pittsburgh, Tennessee, where Lodge Manufacturing is. I got to watch them pouring molten iron to make cast iron skillets. they let me in the back with the hard head and the, the thing in front of your face. And amazing to see people work with molten metal. Very astounding. And so to me, it is inherently, well, in a way, it goes back to that idea of dialogue that we touched on at the beginning.
Yes.
It is inherently relational and interactive. It's not one person yelling at another person and saying, this is how it is. It's like a potluck where everybody brings a dish, maybe. And one person that doesn't cook well brings the flowers or the wine or the sparkling cider or whatever it is. But I do feel that children's literature and culinary literature, they're particularly warm and kind communities. Not very rare is it cutthroaty. I'm good friends with Jane Yolen, who no doubt you've got a million books. She actually, 3 years ago, they did a year that was a read a Jane Yolen book a day year, because she had her 365th book came out that year. As she says of herself, oh, I'm a monster. I mean, a ladybug lands on the windowsill, and Jane can find a story about that. So she makes me look like an amateur. She is so prolific, and I love her dearly, and she's irreverent in exactly the same way I am, and
Yes.
a dear person.
Well, I'm glad that you touched on your culinary writing, because we really focused in on Will It Be Okay, because that's your new re-release. But really, there are just so many facets to your life and career that we could go on for hours and hours. But I wanted to mention we do have several of your books in-house at the library. 2 more of your children's books. This one I just enjoyed so much. And Then It Rained, and then the sun came out. And it's so fun because you can read it both directions and it just loops in, just like real weather and just like real childhood.
And I was afraid when I wrote it. I thought, parents across America are going to hate me, because if this gets read as a bedtime story, you come to the middle and you can flip it over. They'll have to read it 16 times.
Children are delighted, though, at that point. So
thank you.
And they're your audience. So, and then this one, All the Awake Animals Are Almost Asleep. You have this one. And then, of course, your poetry book, Message from the Avocados.
Yes, that I wrote even younger than when Will It Be Okay. Most of those poems I was very, very young. I was like 18, 19 when I wrote them.
Wow, and still so honest. And I mean, beautiful. And then, of course, your culinary writing. We have the Cornbread Gospels with that beautiful cast iron skillet there.
Yeah.
And then Bean by Bean. So,
and this same year, I have another reissue. Let me see if I can find it at hand. I didn't put this next to us. Well, my book, Dairy Hollow House Soup and Bread. And of course, the Writers' Colony that we mentioned is called the Writers' Colony at Dairy Hollow. And before it was a Writers' Colony, it was an inn that Ned and I ran called Dairy Hollow House. And Dairy Hollow House Soup and Bread, far and away my best-selling title. It sold nearly 1 million copies when it came out in 1992. And now it's 30 years later, and I am very happy to say that the University of Arkansas brought out a 30th anniversary edition. It has a new front chapter with lots of pictures in it, not full color food pictures like you see everywhere you turn on the internet, but pictures of the inn, then me, what happened. It sort of tells what happens, and then there's a chapter updating the recipes, and then it's the reproduction of the original book. And so this is a funny year for me. 3 significant things. 2 books that I wrote. I mean, Will It Be Okay? 45 years. And, I mean, one would almost think I'm getting old. And so that one came out. Will It Be Okay? And then Dairy Hollow House Soup and Bread 30th anniversary 30 years ago. And this same year, I am turning 70. So you will probably understand why I found it pretty offensive at physical therapy when the guy that was working with me said, "So, are you still working?" And I said, "Oh yeah, I work full time." And he said, "That's good. It's good to keep busy."
Oh my.
And I thought about it for a week, and then I came back and I thought, I bet he says that to people that don't know how to answer that. And it's so, just like people condescend to children. Now, they condescend to people of a certain age. And I thought, I really need to, he's going to be working with a lot of people who are in pain or in some disability. He needs to not be saying this. And I didn't want to go to his boss over him, because so I put him and his supervisor and said, "I need to talk to you guys for a second."
Yes.
And he said, "Well, I didn't mean it that way." And I said, I'm sure you didn't. Still, you need to know how this population of older people might hear it. And he said, "Well, I say it to myself." And I said, "Really? When you get up in the morning and you're coming to work, do you say to yourself, I'll be happy to get a job and earn a paycheck?" Or do you say, it's good to keep busy? So, I'm still feisty, and I'm still, trying to make it okay for my students and for every other person that I run into, insofar as possible. This world has gotten very uncivil, but that doesn't mean that we have to be part of the uncivil world.
Yes.
So I keep trying to, leave things a little better than I found them along. Some would probably say, "No, you made it worse," but I'm trying to make it better, and to engage kindly and lovingly, but honestly, as you said before. It wasn't sugar coated in that book. The fears are real. The challenges are real. The things that we're the contentiousness that we're feeling is actual.
Yes.
But you can deal with it directly and honestly, with kindness and civility and compassion. And that's what I try for as I live my life and don't always succeed. Who does? But that's what I try for.
Well, I'm glad that we have your books as sort of a guidepost for that way of life. I want to mention where readers can find your books. So I know you have sort of, I guess, a new Paygate is the word that's coming to my mind, but a place where they can order on your website that's going up here in a few days. And the website is dragonwagon.com. And that page will be dragonwagon.com/books.
And I think my person that does, my tech diva, I sometimes call her that, but she does many, 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 many other things beyond tech. She is in the page. It should be up momentarily. For any of you listening non-live, it's already up.
Yes.
If you're listening live, it'll be up shortly.
Yes.
But right on the frontis page, she's going to put like a big button so you can see where you can buy the books. And if you, in the case of Will It Be Okay, for instance, if you get it through the site and you can let me know, she'll put up a thing where if you want me to inscribe it to someone or it's for an occasion, I will gladly be able to do that. But you can also support your local bookstore. And if worse comes to worse, you can go to the Scarlet A and order it online. And I am happy that anyone, and I hope many people, buy my books. It is the way I make my living all these years. And it's also the way I live, as you can tell. It's truly a calling.
Yes. So I want to encourage our viewers to go there. They can also sort of find out about all of the different, again, facets of your life that we didn't touch on tonight, including sort of the origin of your beautiful name. It's not your name, it is your legal name. They can find the story there.
There is a button on the top that says, "Is that your real name?" Because as you can imagine, I get asked this plenty of times, and I finally thought, I'm just going to put it all down. The short version that I tell, which is not true, which is, well, I write for children and it's a children's book name. Yeah, but that's not actually how I got the name. It's just a short throwaway sentence so that we don't fall down the rabbit hole. But if you want to fall down the rabbit hole, click the button that says, is that your real name?
Yes, it's a very, very interesting story. So I want to just thank you for coming to speak with me tonight. I hope that we'll be able to host you again sometime in the future. We would absolutely love that.
Thank you. And be sure to say hi to Talia when she shows up next month.
Yes, I'm so thrilled to know that you're neighbors and that she was your student. So we'll talk about that as well. And that will be the last Tuesday in November. And so we'll be doing that. Goodness. Well, thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
And have a lovely evening.
Thank you. And happy Halloween to those of you who are watching this before Halloween took place. And I love libraries, and I am ever grateful to librarians. And especially at this point when contention is taking place in the library as it is everywhere. And so thank you for being there and protecting the rights of everyone to find their ideas and to be offended by some of those things. You know, good library should have something that gives offense to everybody.
Yes. Yes.
And also that meets their needs. You know, that's so thank you, Shannon, and the Garland County Library. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Good night, everyone.
Night.